Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional league, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
And thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything in the world of fantasy football. As always, Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And what was that?
I don't know. Like I was gonna say it differently, and I was like, and I'm Anthony, but then I was like, I was gonna like slow it down, and then it was some weird middle part of it, and then I just like basically became like those like jumping balls that go across the screen for like a musical. It's like boom, 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 like Anthony. I don't know.
So you're like, I am Ron Burgundy,
right? More or less. Yeah.
That's how you sounded. Like I am Ron Burgundy. No, I remember that. Before we move on, I remember watching that scene on Anchorman and the teleprompter and all that, and literally everything that he read on that teleprompter, he really said it like that. He's like, I am Ron Burgundy.
Yeah, that's all.
That was funny.
That's all you had to do to mess with them. Just put some question marks. It's like the snow is cold. Like it just didn't matter what it was. Anything on there would just be the question mark. But the snow is cold. Like it just whatever punctuation you used, he was going to do, and it was. That movie's still great. Oh,
I know. The first one is so great.
Second one's fine. The second one's not great.
Second one is... the best part about the second one was when they did the newsroom fight, but it was more of a national fight, because I think on that movie, Will Ferrell and the crew, they're like on the... kind of like a channel similar to CNN, because remember, this takes place in the 80s, so the 24-hour news network was like insane. And so they had... guys they had a group from they had a group from ESPN led by Will Smith.
Right.
They had a group of the History Channel led by Liam Neeson. Canadian Network led by Jim Carrey. Mm-hmm. And that was probably my favorite part. I freaked out when Will Smith was on. It was like, Will Smith on an Anchorman movie? Mm-hmm. Really? I don't know. Will Smith's like my favorite actor of all time. Like, I don't know. But anyways, let's move on. Enough about Anchorman. We're going to discuss pretty much free agency as a whole. We're going to do pretty much like a recap. We did a similar show on our football podcast, so you guys can check that out too whenever it's available on whatever platform you are listening this show on. But we're going to discuss our favorite signings. We're going to do we're going to do a couple players that will be affected by free agency.
Right.
And we're going to winners and losers in free agency and how their draft stock will rise and how their draft stock will drop due to moves made by their respective teams.
Yeah.
But first, let's talk about our favorite signings.
Okay.
My favorite one, probably Terrell Pryor. And, he came fairly cheap on, I think, an $8 million, $6 million deal around that range. But it's only for 1 year. Mm-hmm. And... actually, no. I think it was a little bit more than that. I think it was over $10 million. I think I got that wrong, but still, it's a 1 year deal, a prove-it deal, and he was really good for the Browns. He became a receiver 2, with receiver 1 upside, and he played on a team that pretty much played with 500 quarterbacks. He still put up really good numbers. He went over 1,000 yards. He drew 140 targets, had 77 receptions. And then only had 4 touchdowns, but that was because he's on a bad team.
Right.
I like this signing for Washington. It gives Kirk Cousins another weapon.
Right.
If Kirk Cousins even is still there, because who knows what happens with Kirk Cousins and the Niners. And I don't know. But right now, Kirk Cousins is still with Washington. I like the idea of Jamison Crowder Terrell Pryor and Jordan Reed on the same team, I think they could potentially be a really good offense.
Right.
And I think all those guys will help each other in fantasy. And I kind of think it kind of helps Kirk Cousins a little bit in fantasy. But Terrell Pryor, I think he's someone that you have to target as your receiver too.
Yeah. So the thing is, they obviously had some people leave. You had Pierre Garçon, you had Deshaun Jackson leaving, so that filled a void. And you got somewhat of a replacement for it. With Pryor, he's not exactly the best wide receiver, and it's still too early to tell whether it was just like a one-year wonder kind of thing, whether he just got the numbers, because sometimes people have to put up 1,000 yards on a team. Like, that's just going to end up happening. But I do like that signing because it does kind of help in that aspect for him, because he's a better wide receiver now than he was before, and he'll be a better wide receiver because he'll have a better quarterback throwing to him. So that part of it helps. For me, I'm going in kind of the reverse order of that. Instead of a wide receiver getting better because of the quarterback, I'm saying the quarterback's getting better because of a wide receiver. And specifically, I'm talking about Brandon Marshall with Eli Manning, right? Because Eli, once he got Odell Beckham, it basically rejuvenated. There's the one. Yeah. That's the word. Couldn't think of the word. Rejuvenated his career, kind of made him a better quarterback, right? Like Eli Manning already had the 2 Super Bowl rings at the time, but he was starting to kind of regress and starting to be kind of a guy that, even though his last name is Manning, and that part helps the cause, he's throwing a lot of interceptions. He's not doing the same kind of thing. Basically, he wasn't throwing for 4,000 yards, and he was throwing for more interceptions than touchdowns over the last 2 years, over the 2 years before Beckham got there. And you have the situation now where Beckham made him better, and now you're going to have another wide receiver that comes in Brandon Marshall, who basically takes more pressure off of Eli, right? Eli still is a good quarterback, 10 to 15 range, something like that. And when you give him Brandon Marshall, you give him legitimately 2 wide receivers that will catch everything that's thrown to him. And Brandon Marshall's already going to be a guy that's going to get 1,000 yards. He's basically done that his entire career. He's probably still going to do that when he's in New York. But for Eli Manning, I think this raises his notch for him fantasy-wise a little bit more because, yeah, he'll still throw for 4,000 yards like he did last year, but I think this will elevate him to around the 4,500 to 5,000 yard range because there's so many options for him to throw the ball now. I think it just makes him a little bit better. Brandon Marshall, like I said, he's going to be, somewhere around the same kind of things he's always been. I mean, last year was a down year for him, but that'll happen when you play for the Jets. Like, you can only be good for so long when you're with the Jets. I think he can get around 1,000 yards. I think he can get around, 7 to 10 touchdowns. And for Eli Manning, he's going to be a guy who kind of takes the leap from maybe 10 to 15 range fantasy-wise to maybe top 10 range.
Okay, I do like the Brandon Marshall signing as well. I think that's going to boost Eli Manning's fantasy value. I think Eli Manning might be I think he might be a sleeper, which is kind of tough to say because he does have a name, but Eli Manning hasn't been the guy that you rely on heavily.
Right.
I think he could be a sleeper quarterback. I think he can kind of be like, 2017's Matt Ryan. Just comes out of nowhere with a really good year.
Right, because Matt Ryan was someone who you kind of forgot about because he wasn't doing the same kind of things that he was. Like, he kind of regressed. The team wasn't as good. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, Matt Ryan's fine, but he's not great. And then he just came back, and, all of a sudden he was the guy again. He was someone that was just, amazing to see and basically, lived up to all the hype that everyone had been praising him with for the past, 8 years or something like that whenever he got drafted. So it was, nice to see him kind of come back. And for Eli, I think has the potential to do that because same thing. He doesn't have the wide receivers or the running backs to catch the ball like Matt Ryan did. But as far as a talented wide receiver core, he's got that now for sure. Yeah,
and 2 other signings I want to talk about is Alshon Jeffrey and Martellus Bennett.
Right.
Martellus Bennett, I think he might have less value than he did last year, but I still think you still have to take him as a top 10 tight end in fantasy. Mm-hmm. And remember, tight end is a very it's not the deepest position in fantasy, as we all know. That is not. But he's on a team with Aaron Rodgers, but you can't forget the Packers also have Devontae Adams, Randall Cobb, and Jordy Nelson. So, he has a lot of options. The reason why I do like Jared Cook in fantasy is because he has potential to get a lot of red zone targets. touchdown is 6 points. If you can get 2 touchdowns from Martellus Bennett, that's 12.
See, the thing with Bennett is he is such a, how can I say this? He's a good tight end, but fantasy-wise, he's not.
I honestly think okay, I'm not going to overrate him saying, like, oh, you need to take him as a top. Like, no. I think he's someone that you wait late in the draft to get. You never know. He can be a really good waiver wire pickup, too, if he happens to have a couple good games. But he's not the ideal, like, starter tight end for your team. But I do like the potential that he has. For fantasy.
And the fact that he has Aaron Rodgers throwing to him, that part helps the cause because that's just going to make you better. Like, if you have someone as talented as Aaron Rodgers throw you the ball, you are going to end up getting better stats. Like, I think, Jared Cook was fine last year, but he wasn't anything special. But I think Bennett's a better tight end than he is, and he also understands his role because he's also a blocking tight end as well. So he'll do a lot of things to help the team out. But as far as fantasy purposes-wise, you talked about him and Alshon Jeffrey. Alshon Jeffrey hasn't been the same in Chicago since about 2013 when he had 1,400 yards. But it's also been, how can I phrase this gently? Jay Cutler, I don't know if he's good. Do you know if Jay Cutler is good? Because I don't know if Jay Cutler is good. I don't even know if he's, like, okay. Like, I feel like he's just a guy that goes out there and is like, hey, I got a strong arm. Let's throw it all the time. Oh, I threw an interception. Okay. And then just goes to the sideline. Like, I don't know if he's good, so it's hard to tell with people like Alshon Jeffrey because, yeah, he had worse years or whatever. But at the same time, he's like the team was so bad around him, and Jay Cutler doesn't seem like he cares, so it's hard to gauge if he was just having like a couple of bad years or if he's regressed, right? So, Jeffrey, because now he's with the Eagles. And you got to assume he's going to have a better quarterback throwing to him in Carson Wentz, even though Carson Wentz is young. Carson Wentz seems like a guy, because he was so good on such a bad team, that's got to do better for him, just the fact that he's going to be trying harder now on this team. So between the two of them, I like Alshon Jeffrey a little bit better because I think there's just more potential for him to be what we'd expect him to be, to where Bennett's kind of going to do other things and stats-wise won't show up as much as someone like a Jeffrey.
Yeah, I like Alshon Jeffrey. I think playing with Carson Wentz is going to boost his value here. Mm-hmm. Last year was just a terrible year for Chicago. Jay Cutler, was probably the worst Jay Cutler we ever seen. And not only that, he was hurt. Mm-hmm. So, he had guys like Matt Barkley, who actually did pretty solid. Brian Hoyer, who was solid until he had an injury. Mm-hmm. Which was pretty odd for both of those guys. They both went to the same team again this year. Yeah. To the 49ers, but that's not the point I'm trying to address here. Mm-hmm. Alshon Jeffrey, I think he has a chance to be a receiver one. I think he has a chance to be that top 10 receiver again for Carson Wentz. Because remember, this is a team that I think they had the worst receiving core like last season. Jordan Matthews was trash. He was on my fantasy team, trash. Nelson Aguilar, I don't even think I think he was benched like the last 2 games. Trash. So this team with Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith, I don't know. I kind of like those 2 guys heading into the year. I think Alshon Jeffrey will be definitely a very solid 3rd round, maybe 2nd round pick. Torrey Smith can be a really good waiver wire pickup. I don't think he's going to be drafted a lot in upcoming year. Carson Wentz, I think he can be a really good fantasy sleeper because of these 2 guys. Yeah,
you give him actual talented people to throw to, right? That's obviously going to make you a lot better. And for someone like a Carson Wentz, he's somebody who obviously had a lot of hype coming in to the year because number 2 overall pick, you're going to basically have that stuff. Started off the year really, really well. Kind of tailed off a little bit, but again, like when you're basically thrown into the wolves, it's not going to be as easy for you to do it. But 16 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, not great, but also a bad team around him. Wide receivers dropping the ball all the time. Around 4,000 yards. It's a nice start for him, right? And again, like I said, doing this without a lot of talent. Now you're going to slowly bring in more and more and see how much better he can actually be. And for that part of it, at least, I think it's like a positive outlook, at least for Philadelphia in that aspect.
Yeah, so I do think there's a lot to like there in Philadelphia. And we're going to take our first break here. And when we get back, we're going to discuss some players who we think that are going to be highly affected in fantasy due to their teams' moves in free agency. So we're going to discuss a little bit more free agency here when we get back to the Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And we want to discuss some players who we think are going to be affected by moves of their respective teams. What I mean by that is like the impact that these moves have on these players. Like, for example, I want to talk about Julian Edelman. And the reason why I think his fantasy value will be impacted was because of the moves that the Patriots have made.
Right.
Okay, Edelman has been known to be the security blanket of Tom Brady. Gronkowski, he should be coming back. Hopefully he's fully healthy. And Edelman was always there when Gronkowski's not. So, with Gronkowski coming back fully healthy, and then with trading for Brandon Cooks, and then also acquiring Dwayne Allen as your second tight end, where's Edelman going to? Where's his targets going to be at?
Right.
So that's the thing that makes me concerned if you're going to go after Edelman. I think his fantasy value will be impacted by Brandon Cooks and Gronkowski because, honestly, let's face it, I think Brandon Cooks is a more talented receiver than Edelman. No disrespect to Edelman, it's just Brandon Cooks is more. He has more speed that Tom Brady has never had in a while. Mm-hmm. So I still think Edelman can be a really good receiver in fantasy. I just think that with Gronkowski there, if he's still healthy, if he can stay healthy, and then with Brandon Cooks there, you might have to be a little bit worried about Edelman. I think he might be a risky play here.
Yeah, no, and that's pretty good because, you know, you said Edelman's always kind of been the new, Wes Welker-ish of the team, where he's basically like a little slot guy that can get you a lot of stuff. The Patriots are going to be affected all the way around, right? They're going to be affected with Gronkowski because, you know, you brought in Allen as a tight end who can probably get a few yards from him because you don't know if Gronk can actually stay healthy because he's, outside of like 1 or 2 years, he's always missed a few games because of back problems or knee problems or whatever. Like, it's always been some nagging thing with him. So the team itself as a whole is going to struggle a little bit more. And for Edelman, he's probably the number one guy that's going to basically take the brunt of this whole thing, right? Like, I mean, yeah, you could also say someone like a Jordan Matthews is going to be kind of taken aback once you sign people like Alshon Jeffrey because clearly he's not going to be the number one guy. But I'm not even saying that's going to be a bad thing because, you know, he's going to have fewer opportunities to drop the ball. Like, you know, you said you had him on the team and so did I. It didn't exactly work out well for him. You also have the situation where you have Adrian Peterson, right, who obviously one of the best running backs in the history of the Vikings organization, one of the best running backs in the history of the NFL. But I think the whole, and this is going to sound weird to say, it's kind of like a 6 degrees separation kind of thing, Ezekiel Elliott kind of messed everything up for him, right? And what I mean by that is he's a free agent at this point, right? And there's always been the thing with the running backs where it's kind of like, oh, we can draft whoever we want to, and we kind of replaced kind of the Arian Foster mentality, right? Because he kind of was, I think he was undrafted, and he came in and all of a sudden was, you know, doing great things. And you would have these things where you'd have running backs who either were like low draft picks or not even drafted at all coming in and producing. Okay, Ezekiel Elliott came in last year, was a fourth overall player in the draft, came in, set the world on fire. And I don't think teams are signing him at this point, A, because of his age, but also because you think, okay, well, we can just go get a Dalvin Cook, we can get a Leonard Fournette, we can get a Christian McCaffrey, we can get these people who, are much younger and much cheaper than him. So his value now all of a sudden, like, it doesn't matter where he goes. Like, I don't think he gets the same opportunities now because teams will just think, we're just going to draft this guy and forget about just surviving with a running back. Like, these guys can come in and help us, whether it will or not. Ezekiel kind of messed up the math for a lot of older running backs, right? Like, he kind of changed the game in that aspect.
Yeah, and Ezekiel Elliott was he was like a breath of fresh air,
and he might be a fluke because he was a freak at Ohio State. Like, it's
not only that, but you got the offensive line. Maybe he's
that's true. Yeah, exactly that too.
So maybe a sophomore slump is headed towards Ezekiel Elliott, but we're not going to talk about that right now. I wanted to talk about the Seattle backfield, and the reason why I do think there's two players in particular that could be affected by a free agent move that the Seahawks made. That's Eddie Lacy. So Eddie Lacy was signed to the Seahawks, but the players that I think will impact that the most was CJ Prosise and Thomas Rawls.
Right.
I actually liked CJ Prosise last year. He was effective in the passing game and the running game. For example, and I think it was like middle of the season in November, and against the Patriots, the game that I think that was the only game that Tom Brady lost last year. That was a good game in Sunday Night Football. But Prosise had 87 yards receiving and 66 yards rushing. So that's a total of, I don't know, over like 130 yards. I don't know the math on that.
Right.
I wasn't a math major in college for a reason.
Sure.
But that's a lot of yards for a running back. He didn't have a touchdown, but that's like at least like 13 points right there.
Right.
And then when, in Philadelphia, he only had like 4 rushes, but he has 76 yards rushing and a touchdown.
He always had something that was kind of good for fantasy-wise. Like, he always had something that would help you out. Another thing that, and this isn't even a player that affects the team, but, I mean, honestly, how much do you think Kyle Shanahan leaving affects Matt Ryan? Like we talked about before, Matt Ryan basically got elevated out of the blue, right? Like, he was good, but then he had a bad year or two, and we kind of forgot about Matt Ryan. Okay, well, maybe part of the reason why he came back was because of Kyle Shanahan and the offensive schemes that he's able to do. So with him being gone now, with the offensive coordinator now not being there anymore, I think that could affect Matt Ryan, Devontae Freeman, maybe not Julio Jones because he's kind of a freak. But, there's the potential to basically have the NFC South kind of be out of whack again, right? To have the Falcons not be the leader of the division, have the Panthers maybe go up there, maybe the Buccaneers go up there. Like, there's potential for this whole thing to flip. He's not a player, but he's still someone who's probably just as valuable fantasy-wise as anybody else.
Yeah, that's actually, I didn't even think about that. But Kyle Shanahan had a huge impact in Matt Ryan's career the past 2 years. You never know. Maybe he can impact Brian Hoyer. No, but anyways. It may be. But anyways, I do want to talk about Seattle backfield again. I didn't get a chance to talk about Thomas Rawls. He's another guy that could be affected by the Eddie Lacy signing.
Right.
Because I think Eddie Lacy, I think he can be the starter. When you look at these guys on paper, Eddie Lacy, when he's fully healthy, when he's conditioned, when he's in shape, Eddie Lacy can be a freak in the backfield. Like, he can be your starter. He's only 26, so he still has time.
Right.
But, with Thomas Rawls, he was effective in some ways, and I think it won in early December in a 40-7 win against the Carolina Panthers. Ross had 106 yards and 2 touchdowns. His best game ever. So we've seen the talent that Thomas Ross has, but I do think with Eddie Lacy there, you got to be concerned about the time with Thomas Ross and CJ Prosise. But don't forget, I do think they're guys that are the perfect handcuffs because we don't know how Eddie Lacy is going to perform. We don't know if he's going to be in shape. We don't know if he's going to stay healthy the entire year. Because remember, he is coming off an ankle injury. So I do think those are 2 guys that could be sleepers again.
Right.
So those could be guys that can be affected by Eddie Lacy.
No, I totally agree with that.
All right, we're going to take our second break. And when we get back, we're going to discuss winners and losers in fantasy football. So we'll talk about all that when we return to the Goes to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And we're going to discuss players that we think their value would rise and their value would drop. So we're going to call this winners and losers. So I think the biggest winner of free agency regarding fantasy value, I have to go with Jameis Winston. He got Deshaun Jackson.
Right.
One of the addition of Deshaun Jackson is going to add a whole another element to that offense in Tampa Bay. You remember, Winston still has Mike Evans, who I think he can. I think by the end of the year he can be a top 5 receiver. Like, he has that kind of talent. He's not a top 5 receiver yet, but he can get there. I do like the addition of Deshaun Jackson, and what they do with the running back position could impact Winston as well. Because remember, Doug Martin is suspended for the first 4 games, but they did re-sign Jacquizz Rodgers, who had a pretty solid impact when Doug Martin was injured.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Yeah, he had a good year. Yeah.
So I do think Jameis Winston is the biggest. Well, not. I say he is the biggest winner because of Deshaun Jackson. I do think this is the year that Tampa Bay and Jameis Winston finally get over the hump.
Okay.
I think it could be that year. So that's my biggest winner. What about you?
So, I mean, there are certain winners, like, for example, Tom Brady, right? Tom Brady, you got another wide receiver in Brandon Cooks that allows you to do more things on the field. It allows you to not be as obvious isn't the right word, but you know how they always kind of do those dink and dunk passes to Edelman and Gronkowski, stuff like that. It gives you something to where, like, you can be more, have different kind of levels to your quarterback play. It can make it so you're not as predictable when you play. You could also say that. I mean, you could also say someone like an Eli Manning, how we talked about before, how he has Brandon Marshall now. You could talk about Carson Wentz and the fact that he now has actual wide receivers to throw the ball to. I think all of them actually have gotten a lot better, but you could also say for, someone like Alshon Jeffrey, like, now you're actually playing with a better quarterback. We talked about with Martellus Bennett, he's playing with a better quarterback now. Like, there's certain things that make it all better. Now, with Tom Brady, I mean, how much better is he going to be? The dude just won the Super Bowl and was 14-2, I think, as a starter. Like, all things considered, like, the team was great. The team itself was good, and now you just kind of added to it. So it's hard to say Brady improved the most just because of how high that team already was, right? Considering how good of a team it already was.
Well, he was actually 11-1 because he was suspended
True.
First 4 games.
The team, yeah, I guess the team is more what I'm saying. I think the team was 14-2. But yeah, no, he, like, as a whole, he played really, really well last year. So all of that taken into consideration, you think about all the people that signed, with other teams that were kind of a random, like, why exactly did they do that, kind of assigning things that didn't really make sense. You have the situation right now in Pittsburgh, right, where you don't know if Ben Roethlisberger is staying or not. Like, he says he's coming back, but he's like, oh, maybe I retire, because he's been playing this for a while, and that dude gets hit as well as and as hard as anybody else. I don't fully know what Carolina's doing with Cam Newton, just kind of like wasting him a little bit, but I would still say, as far as like the best case scenario, I think it's actually for Eli Manning, just because he gets somebody, because the team's already good around him, right? And that just brings him to another level. Brady's already whatever he is. Maybe he's a little bit higher, but not too much, because, whether they use Brandon Cooks a lot or not, he's already has a good team around him. Carson Wentz, he's not going to do that big of a leap from where he is to where, to make the playoffs maybe, right? For the Giants, they were already kind of like right at that edge because the defense was getting really good. You had Paul Perkins, who was a good running back, and now you get this other thing with Brandon Marshall, and to where now I think going forward, it's a best-case scenario for him. And I think from a pure fantasy football perspective, it's the best because Bennett's not going to get a lot of receiving yards. Alshon Jeffrey is going to do well, but is not going to be anything to where he's Julio Jones, right? I think the best case scenario as far as someone who upgraded was Eli Manning.
Yeah, I do like Eli Manning. Like I said earlier in the show, I think he can be this year's Matt Ryan. And that's going to be so well. That's going to bode well huge. I think the biggest sleeper in fantasy is Jack Doyle, the tight end for the Indianapolis Colts. It appears that Doyle, I think if Dwayne Allen was still on that team right now, I don't think Doyle would be on there. But it turns out the Colts actually traded Allen to the Patriots.
Yep.
And Doyle re-signed. You know it's a new era when the Colts and Patriots make trades.
Right.
That would have never happened like 10 years ago.
It wouldn't have happened a few years ago when they blew the whistle on him for Deflategate.
Yeah. So, I do think Jack Doyle is going to – I think he's the biggest sleeper. I think he's – because he doesn't have a name. And he had – honestly, I'm not going to – no disrespect to him, but he kind of has a plain name, Jack Doyle. I'm not going to lie. No disrespect to him. I'm just saying that's probably why he's not really highly talked about in fantasy, because he just doesn't have a name that really, like, makes your jaw drop.
Sure.
Well, Andrew Luck, he loves throwing it to the tight end. He's target tight ends an average of 135 times per year. There were only 8 other teams that hit that mark in 2016. So Andrew Luck loves throwing it to his tight ends. And I think he can at least get, 80 targets around there. I think he could be a top 12, top 10 option. And I don't think there's any reason that he won't be outside of that top 10. I think he can be a mid-round to late. I think you can get him really late because he doesn't have a name. You can get him the 12th round?
Right. Yeah, no, he's
way
down.
I think he's someone that's going to be I think he's going to be the biggest sleeper in fantasy football. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he loses his job. But as of right now, Jack Doyle, I think he's one of the biggest winners because of Dwayne Allen going to New England.
And that's kind of the whole thing we talked about with Bennett, the whole having a good quarterback throw to you is going to make you a lot better, right? Like, it doesn't matter who the wide receiver was in New Orleans. You were going to do good because you had Drew Brees throwing to you, whether it was Brandon Cooks, whether it was Marcus Colston, didn't matter who it was. He was going to keep kind of throwing for 5,000 yards, which gave about 2 or 3 wide receivers every single year to get around 1,000 yards to see how good they were. So, yeah, I think that situation is going to be really good for Doyle. I think even something like a Latavius Murray is a nice little thing, whatever, because he's going to a team that will contend. It's not like he's going from the Raiders to the Jaguars, right? He's going to a team that's still going to be a pretty good team and has at least a solid defense to work around him. He can be somebody that is used as, not the guy, but somebody that, can get around 800 to 1,000 yards, just so that way they can actually have a fully reliable running game, because last year Asiata or whoever else you want to say, they were just caca, just so bad. They couldn't do anything running the ball. At least now they have a situation where they're going to rely on him, and we saw the talent that he at least had in Oakland getting around 1,000 yards. I think he can do that same thing in Minnesota.
I don't know. I have to go with Latavius Murray as probably a loser in fantasy. I think his stock is a little bit down. He was running behind the top 5 offensive line.
Right.
He averaged 4 point yards a carry. I feel like he should have averaged so much. At times when I was watching...
But he was also splitting time with 2 other people.
That is true, but when I saw him running the football...
Right.
There's times when he just looked slow off the line.
Yeah, no, he was never a, Chris Johnson-y kind of fast dude.
But, I think he might be in a competition with Jeremy McKinnon, who...
He was so bad last year.
I know he was, but I think he might have... It's because Jeremy McKinnon's been on this team for a while, so he knows the system. So, honestly, with him competing against 2 other rookies last year, competing against 2 other guys that have been on this team, I think for that reason, I think Murray has a little bit more competition than he did in Oakland, Wade McKinnon and Asiata. Even though they weren't good, I still think Murray may be a little bit overrated at this point right now.
I mean, he might be overrated. I'm not saying he's the best guy in the world. All I'm saying is that, when you bring in Murray, right? I get that he didn't necessarily get the bank broken for him when he went over to Minnesota. But, I mean, with all that said, the dude still did get a pretty high contract, and he's going to probably be the starter. You don't bring in him just to kind of be the guy that rides the bench. Like, I think he's, someone who, again, like, not the best in the world or whatever, but I mean, what was it, like 3 years, $15 million, something like that? Like, he's gonna, like, that's enough for where, like, you're going to be the number one guy. Like, if you get that much money for a running back, you're probably going to be the starter. And I think, even though the line stinks in Minnesota, like, that's fine. I think they can improve that a little bit through the draft or anything else like that. And because that defense is so good and so relied upon, like, I think that'll basically – I think it just – everything helps with him getting around the same numbers, not having to split time with Washington or Richard, being basically the guy. Because, like you said, whether it was McKinney or what's his name, Asiata, like, both of them were just like – they weren't good. Like, they said, here, you guys try something, and they didn't do anything when they had the opportunity. Yeah,
and I think the biggest loser – in free agency, and whose fantasy value is way down now than it was before, Jordan Matthews of the Philadelphia Eagles.
That guy.
I had him in fantasy, and my gosh, he was trash.
That guy.
And, he averaged about 8.4 targets a game, which was 20th among receivers.
Right.
But he only finished as the 49th receiver overall on a points-per-game basis. So he had a lot of drops. He wasn't productive. He has to deal with Alshon Jeffrey taking targets. He has to deal with Torrey Smith taking targets.
Right.
Don't forget, Zach Ertz is still there. He can take targets. Let's just say the Eagles draft a running back because, let's face it, Ryan Matthews doesn't blow anybody out of the water. Let's just say the Eagles decide to draft Dalvin Cook.
Sure.
He's going to take targets out of the backfield.
Right.
Let's just say they get McCaffrey. He's going to take targets out of the backfield.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think Jordan Matthews. He's going to be an odd man out. He's way down the depth chart. I think he's right. I think he's the fourth guy that's going to be on targets.
So the third guy.
He's someone that's going to be way off the radar.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's the biggest loser because he's not going to get a lot of chance to get produce.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you on that. I think he's basically somebody who they gave him an opportunity last year. It's like, all right, see what you can do. And then it's like, oh, nope, never mind. Alshon, come here. I don't care what we pay you. Come here. Torrey, you come too. Someone please help us.
But yeah, I think Jordan Matthews is someone he's not going to have a lot of fantasy value heading to 2017.
Right.
But who knows? Things can change throughout the preseason and throughout the season as well. All right, well, that's going to conclude our show. It was a great show, Anthony. I thank you guys for tuning in. I'll be back on Tuesday. You will not be here, Anthony. You're never here on Tuesdays, man. Like, why am I alone, man?
I apologize. I will be here Friday, though. Do you not let there?
Now I have to wait a whole another week.
All
right. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. You can catch the show on a variety of platforms: Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and on the website GSMCpodcast.com. You can actually listen to the football show, the GSMC football podcast that Anthony and I do about 3 times a week. I do it 5 times a week. Anthony does it 3 times a week. So you can guys listen to that as well. And if you guys are into baseball, we're 10 days away when we recorded this episode. Ben and I, who is another host here, we do the baseball show. So you guys can listen to that as well. So we have a lot of podcasts for you guys to listen to.
Sports, health and wellness, MMA, a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, MMA is doing really well right now. Mm-hmm. And I think we just dropped a women's mixed martial arts podcast, which I think is doing also well on the iTunes charts. So we have a lot for you guys to listen to. But, this is going to conclude it for me. As always, I'm Jeremiah.
And I'm Anthony.
And I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to the Goals to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.